welcome, Dr. George, and hello, my fellow HITLAB and Breakthrough Alliance folks on the phone. Always a pleasure to talk to you today. Sorry about my screen, but as long as you can hear me, that's good. So, Dr. George, I always like to start off with at least the first question around your journey, and so the audience gets to know you. How did you get yourself to be the director of clinical research program at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai?
Well, I have a very unusual story because I'm originally an opera singer. I'm an award-winning opera singer who came to New York to sing with City Opera, and I unfortunately found myself without a job. And someone recommended that I speak with the director of the research at St. Vincent's Hospital, which unfortunately no longer exists. And he showed me a drawer of papers, and it didn't look too scary, and I said okay. And I literally jumped into what was the HIV epidemic and the research that was being done, and literally cut my teeth on about 60 clinical trials, learning right and left. And I have to tell you, there were some tears amongst all of that, but truly it uncovered in me, I think, a real passion for research, which I didn't really know I had, because I guess I'm inherently curious about human beings. And so from there, I transitioned to Mount Sinai as a research coordinator, and worked with the two wonderful physicians, Dr. David Simpson, a highly regarded neurologist in pain, and Dr. Jessica Robinson Papp. And I learned so much about chronic pain and became fascinated about pain, and decided, well, because I was helping them with designing research and enrolling subjects, and I thought, well, I want to do this. So I went back to school and got my PhD in health psychology. And I've become a sort of a clinical trial specialist in parallel with my fascination with research. And so my expertise was elevated with the Department of Neurology to become the director of clinical research. So I help a lot of innovators, not only myself here at the Department of Neurology, to take things to the next level when we're thinking of creative things. And so, I totally feel so blessed in some ways that I kind of fell into this pathway, because I've learned so much about the FDA and regulatories. But in coupled with that, I always bring the perspective of the patient and an advocate for patients and those who can participate in research. So that's really become a real passion of mine, especially when it comes to chronic pain, which is so complex both for women and men. And I think that's what got me very fascinated, is that you can see one person who's clinically the same as the next, yet their pain is so different. It's fascinating.
Well, thank you. And again, I apologize for my video glitch today, but I don't know if everybody caught it, but I think you said you came here to be an opera singer. So I think you're our first opera singer who is now a doctor, or a doctor who is an opera singer. So that is actually truly fascinating, but great journey. Because part of what we do at HitLab and Breakthrough Lines is talking about women and women's health, I want to focus on that a little bit and what you do from a clinical research perspective. So my next question is, what are some of the unique challenges women investigators face in the digital health space, particularly in leadership or high impact roles? And maybe how can some of these barriers be addressed?
Well, part of the problem is that time is of the essence. Even in my role as both an investigator and the director of clinical research, I have to somehow straddle what are the responsibilities for what my position is, plus also my research endeavors. And sometimes, if those are not covered by funding, you're often squeezing a lot of what you'd like to do in with your time, and that's a challenge, because we've learned that in a recent study last year, that 37% of women who have MD PhDs are becoming successful researchers with NIH funding of an R01, and that really protects your time. You now are able to provide the funding that gives you the time to focus on your research agenda. And we've also seen that in 10 major medical specialty societies, that fewer than 15% of department chairs and in the societies had leadership roles that were women. And so that's really, we need women in these roles so that they can become mentors. I was very fortunate to have Dr. Jessica Robinson Papp because she really is a person who has helped me as a mentor and is really positioned now as the vice chair here to be a mentor for future women in research in our department. And I know Mount Sinai is taking this role of women in health very seriously and focused on I think one big publication last November about women in science and health. And also too, for the first time, we had a digital women's competition where we could submit our proposals to get funding, because that's really what it takes for us women to be investigators. We have to receive funding. I think for me, what's challenging, I'm working on a virtual reality self-hypnosis tool that uses software. And I think many people see me as women, and I have this very unusual background. And basically, they're like, really? How are we going to fund that? Does that really have any legs? I think that's where I have most of the challenge. So I think between time and if you are a woman, sometimes you have a unique background that sometimes when people are looking at you to provide funding, they're not quite certain that you can get the job done, either because of time elements or because of maybe you have this unusual background that seems like, what are you doing in science? So I think it's that. It's how do we find ways to give women financial support so they can. And that's where I think it's the challenge is how can we provide funding for new investigators? How can we surround them with support and mentorship? And I know we're taking a very, very hands-on approach with me. If I hear of a woman who's wanting any research help, I'm on board right away and helping them regulatories, navigating this process. Because if you're going to be a scientist researcher, you really have to cut your teeth on the process, which is quite challenging.
Great, thank you. And so we just focused on sort of the investigator piece. Now let's go down one level to let's get into the actual trial design, and that's where my question is going to be next. How do you see gender bias impacting the design, execution, and interpretation of research in digital health, and what kind of steps can be taken to ensure women's health is accurately represented beyond the
Well,
investigator piece?
I totally am such an advocate of providing funding for participants in a major way. When we're working to include women as research participants, we need to think of their roles and how complex their lives are. Often these women are caring for either parents or children, or they're working and caring for multiple family members, and it can be quite difficult for them to set aside the time to be part of a research project, even if they really could benefit from being included in some of the research that we're doing. So it's advocating at that very beginning is to set aside sufficient budgeting so that we can give them caregiver support, we can give them transportation support, that we can design studies that have more decentralized visits. We can do things that will incorporate only the times that they need to come into the hospital or to the clinical research site when they need to for testing, but we can do other elements out at offsite with an e-platform of some type. Decentralized trials are going to be something that really helps include more women in our study designs, and really focusing on how can we advocate at early stages the complexity of a woman's life and make sure that we're supporting those individuals. A lot of the research that I do is qualitative. So I hear the stories of the complexity of some of the women's challenges. And so if you're doing research in some of the depression or mood disorders or preeclampsia or endometrial pain, you really need to understand how can I provide funding to support the women so that they can find a way to participate and it's not such a high bar to jump through.
So I want to take it down another level. We talked about the participants, but I want to talk about a little bit about like what strategies have been successful in increasing female participation in clinical trials or digital health studies, and how do we encourage more women to both enroll and lead in those areas?
I think what really was fascinating when I saw Stanford did a study looking at time banking, because a lot of times there are uncompensated roles that clinicians will be part of, and that they are able to bank that time in exchange for protected time. So we need to start doing things that are innovative for women so that they can be included in as a researcher. That is really the key essence is time and compensation, because so much of our participants rely on that availability of that clinician. So if we've designed a study, if that clinician can't be available but 3 to 5 minutes, we're not going to get the quality of research that we need. So it's about how can we provide funding for those clinicians to be investigators like myself. So this Stanford study did a very unique thing where they provided time banking. If you did uncompensated work, you were able to get time back to you. So we need to do that along with how can we get more women to show up to all kinds of networking where we can I know for me, take my Comfort Wave VR, I became much more interested in how I can bring that to the forefront for women who suffer with post-mastectomy pain syndrome because I was at a networking event. I learned a process of how I can potentially move my idea forward because of a networking event that was with other digital health partners, other people who are doing research in the field. And it has just become a wonderful way of understanding how I can network, find mentors, find people who can help me bring my ideas to the forefront. So I think it's going to be a way of trying to find ways that are innovative beyond what it is that we've typically done for women.
Okay, we have time for one last question because I see Stan has popped up, but we do have about 3 minutes left. I just want to talk about career development. People look at your career. How can the digital health ecosystem better support early career women researchers and investigators to help them thrive in the field if they want to have a career like yours?
Well, I think, it's very difficult if you are wanting to do research. And I think we need to have more opportunities of symposiums or face-to-face networking where we can get together and discuss if you are an MD, PhD, or let's say you're just a PhD like me, get together with other people who have gone through the path as the way of being curious about something for your patient population. So often that's what I've seen. I've seen someone who's curious about, can I make this simpler for patients? Can I make this more accessible? Can we use a digital device? Can I give something to people? And if I have a germ of an idea, how can I go and talk to some people who can help me formulate a process of doing the research, of getting the funding, of what are the regulations, because it is multi-layered. And then also too, as we know, about it's a challenge of time. It's going to take us some time to bring our idea to the forefront. But if you're persistent, which when everyone talks to me, they say, what is research? I said, it's a 24/7 deal. I love it. You have to have a passion for what you want to do in the digital health field. And I think if you bring these passionate people together, is with accelerators or with the new startup ventures or with any type of collaborative group where you can get those germ of ideas off the ground, it's going to be a phenomenal encouragement for someone like myself.
Well, thank you, Dr. George, for your time today. I really appreciate it.